welcome everyone to the Game Dev Discussion Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Alex Meadows, and this week we have a returning guest, Kurt Kupser on. Dude, you can't get away from me. I've chased you to the initiative. You tried to run away from me from counterplay, and now I've chased you to the initiative.
That's all right. I put in a terrible review for you, and still got through. So it's all right.
Man, how you been? Dude, I need. You're the guy I've been wanting to talk to about this. Like, as soon as everyone blew up about UE5, I was like, okay, I need someone who knows, who's smart to like tell me about UE5. So, what was your impressions from this demo? Like, is your mind changed about anything? Is it like made you think differently about anything?
No, I don't think so. I think it looks pretty cool. I mean, I really like all the stuff they're doing with. They showed more about like their like tile management system, the like streaming and instancing and stuff like that, which is pretty awesome. One thing I thought was really cool was that big monster they did was done by like Aaron Sims Creative. And what was interesting about that was I think they just like kit bashed everything together and rigged it in engine or something like that. So I think it's sweet how they're like, I don't know if it's a philosophical thing that they're doing for their tools and stuff where they just are empowering artists to like develop things really quickly in engine. And I like that philosophy a lot, right? Like an engine that works for you and your team to, figure out what you want to do fast, right? Like rapid prototyping and stuff. But I also think that we'll see more of that stuff too, as like Epic is starting to serve more of like the film and VFX industry, like we've seen with like The Mandalorian and stuff like that, right? Where all that like real-time visualization in larger productions for film and TV can be huge. So it's gonna be sweet, and games are gonna benefit, I think, as a result.
Yeah, it was funny because I saw like lots of people were throwing around like the Lumen, the global illumination and stuff, and I was like, oh my god, this visual fidelity is insane. And I'm like, you guys, you remember there has been light mass GPU baking for like a while. You can get this visual effect like if you bake the light in, like okay, it's not real time, but like pretty much one for one. Lumen's been fun. I've had a little play with it. Kind of just dragging very big, colorful lights around an outdoor scene, and like the light bounces and just it all working in real time is amazing.
I love seeing emissive spheres just being dragged around spaces and lighting things up. I will probably never get tired of that.
Dude, my one looks a bit weird. Like it's when I opened the emissive sphere for the first time, like in UE5 when I migrated my project across. I was like, that looks weird to me because I've got a different tone mapper on my default UE4 because I like to get like, when you crank an emissive up, it goes to white. I wouldn't mind to stay as a colour, so I've got like the Reinhardt tone mapper on. And I thought it was broken. I was like, I opened UE5 and I put a sphere in there and like cranked the emissive up. And I was like, why is it going white? Oh shit, what? Why is it? Am I shit? I'm not.
How are you cranking the emissive? Are you putting it like
just set the power in?
A value of like, just upping the value in your vector parameter, or do you have like a scalar you're multiplying against?
I literally have the input color multiplied by a scalar value.
Okay.
And crack up, but like in default UE, like the emissive goes to white, but in a tone when I use a different tone mapper, it stays at a really high saturated value. But it scared me. I was like, what the fuck? What have they changed everything? Like the emissive's a bit. I was like, oh wait, no, I've got a different tone mapper on my other one. Okay, that makes sense now. But it's interesting with rapid prototype and stuff, right? Because it's like the way I'm kind of seeing this panning out is Lumen. I think it's just gonna come. It feels like it's gonna come across the way it looks like it is, and then I will probably take care of a lot of the LODs and keeping like so maybe the Vista stuff a little bit nicer and not having to be so much like kind of low geo. Aside from that, I mean, I don't see us I don't think the pipeline is going to shift to no more baking high polys. I mean, I think the pipeline for environment art, particularly, is going to stay pretty much the same. Maybe poly counts go up a little bit here and there, but it ain't going to change drastically, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't really think so, but I think we talked about this last time when Unreal was like announced or the UE5 demo was shown. But I think that like visionaries will do some crazy stuff with it that we can't picture. I'm talking like tech people doing some like really tricky streaming things or something like that. So I'm not really too sure, but I think it's too early to tell, right? Like it's just coming out now. It's in early access still. Like I've said before, like in 6 or 7 years, once we've had like devs do like 2 or 3 production cycles with it and like built games from the ground up, that's when we'll really see it like pay off, right? Like it's always fun to look at the old announcements for like Unreal 4 and then what games have done
Yeah.
towards the end of its life cycle, you know? So it's a really strong foundation to start off with right now, and it's just only going to improve from there.
I'll be honest, I'm still pretty hyped from. I mean, I think I believe I sent it to you. Do you see the Digital Foundry Metro, the PC version with
Yes. Yeah.
Oh man, like that for me was that got me excited because I was like, that's a game. I have that now. Like this isn't a tech demo. Like, and you know, don't get me wrong, the tech demo was running on an Xbox and a PS5, but this is a game. Like this is made, and it looked incredible. And I'm like, oh, I really hope we lean into it.
I mean, it's great for existing like augmenting content or whatever, but I think we've really seen this with Ratchet and Clank coming out soon. And they showed in the demo like the Lumen demo, like that just came out the other day. They switched to the dark world and they just like flip a switch and you go through a portal or something and it's like a whole different like scene. And Ratchet and Clank, like I said, is huge on that. So I can't wait to like play that and see what that looks like. But I think we'll see a lot more of that stuff in the coming years, rather than just like nice lights, but like really cool gameplay.
It's funny now because the whole like mindset I've had towards like megascans, when people are like, oh, megascans, like it makes things just easy. I'm like, no, like people looking at art now have to use a slightly different like frame of reference. Like when Substance Painter first came out, everyone's like, oh no, it's cheating because like compared to like how we did it in Photoshop. And it's like, no, just the bar's been raised a little bit, and you need to know what the end. Like, you know, when we first saw bronze armor thrown on something, we're like, oh, that's incredible. And it's like, now, if you see bronze armor on a prop, you're like, come on, I know you've just thrown that on. And it's kind of the same with I think Megascans is balanced out a bit. Like, you see a Megascan scene, and you're like, okay, I can detach the Megascans assets from what you're actually doing, which is lighting and composition, and etc. And it's like, okay, I could my frame of reference has changed. And I think Lumen's going to do the same. It's going to be like, okay, cool, you've thrown some nice GI in, very good. Like, how have you actually
you got the
lit this?
sphere. Like, how do you push this?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of really good conversations that I've been following, just talking about that, right? Like, it's a tool like anything else, and it's easy just to be like, I'll put in my lighting, and then the performance crawls, and then you're like, okay, well, I'm not really sure, right? It takes a really skilled person, and lighting artists are, you know, adept at this, is optimizing things and making sure the game runs and pushing and pulling on all the knobs and dials, not just turning them on all the time, full bore, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's always a skill to game art that's like optimizing and making it run and be performant and still look great.
Well, I mean, speaking of this, like, because that I kind of learned, especially when you get to interact with some lighting artists, and it's like actually throwing lights in and, you know, making it a nice composition. That's kind of the easy bit, right? Like, it's like, okay, now make this look good and run and be performant, and knowing what dial. Like, it's far more technical. I mean, Brian Leloup is great for this. Like, every time I hear that guy talk or I see him talking on the Discord, I'm like, right, notepad out.
I'm just
what's this man saying?
Taking notes for real. Yeah.
He's the one who put me onto the tone mapper stuff. I was like, I had a problem with, like, you know, I had this scene and I was trying to get like the windows and doors to be orange, and I put it in there, and then he was just explaining to me how tone mappers work, and I was like, holy shit, I need to like screen cap this and save this somewhere because this is golden. But that's kind of working with people. It's something we were talking about off the air, which is, you know, like as our frame of references change looking at art, so is my frame of references change looking at artists. You know, I kind of see it as being the best artist and I'm not so much impressed anymore. I am still impressed. I see great art and it's cool. But what you're like to work with and like interact with as a person and as an artist is slowly creeping up in terms of like an overlapping the skill as an artist, in my opinion, on like and what I value. Like, there's some fantastic artists out there. If you're like not easy to work with, it's like, oh well, I'd rather work with someone who maybe isn't the best of the best, but is one of the greatest people to work with as a person. And it's something we're talking about there.
You know what's happening to you?
I'm growing up.
Well, yeah, that too. You're becoming a production artist.
Yeah, maybe. God, that's scary.
Nothing scary about it. I think there's value in knowing when to put on your production art hat versus your like artist hat, right?
Mm.
It's the classic saying, like everyone would always rather work with somebody who's like a solid team player, really dependable, and like gels well with the team, rather than somebody who might be like some incredible artist savant, but is difficult to work with.
Yeah, and I fluctuate on this because sometimes I hate game art. I'm like, oh god, I'm like when I see a game get optimized, for example, like okay, we make this look amazing. Does it
That's
run?
why you like ray tracing so much.
Yes, that's it. It's like I just then and during them times I'm like, oh man, screw optimization, screw game art. Like it ruins art. But if there's something like that fucking Horizon trailer comes out, you're like,
yeah,
looks great. It's playing. It's a game. Like this looks incredible. It's I fluctuate back and forth. It depends. It depends on what I'm looking at, but it is weird. Where I like how the terminology gets like being a game dev and being an artist, and like I've less and less I like to be associated as being an artist and more being a game dev, just because I think there's also connotations that come with being an artist, especially working with like business people. They see artists as big divas who have egos and could be difficult to work with. It's been interesting to notice, even like me and you when we've spoken in the past. It's like, oh yeah, that guy's amazing to work with. That person's amazing to work with. Like we're not talking about, oh, he's the best artist in the world. It's like, no, he's great to work with, and that's what we get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, like think back on productions you've worked on and stuff, right? Like, I mean, we all think of like the end result and stuff like that, but what I always think about first is like when you're in the trenches, right? What does it look like? Do you like the people that you're working with? And that's more important to me. Like it makes all the difference because that's your day to day, like your moment to moment. So yeah, I think it's an important distinction to make, and there's like incredible people and incredible artists, and everyone wants to work with incredible people who also make incredible art. But I'd always 100% rather work with somebody who's pretty chill, pretty sweet to talk to.
Well, I mean, it's like what we were like when we were counterplay, dragging people into Discord. Come talk in Discord, like just come hang out, like get to know each other as people rather than just what we see on the Slack channels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose also teams which are like kind of, I guess, quote, forged in a fire, like where you've gone through some rough times. Because every production cycle has it. Like there's them times where, okay, back against the wall, we've got to get something done. Them teams that come out the other end, you tend to be a lot closer, and you tend to know, like, who are the people who are willing to work as a team and those who are not. And that's, I think, like, the industry's a very small place. Everyone knows everyone. You can see the people who stick around and do well because they're probably the ones who are very good to work with. Like those who aren't great to work with, imagine it's a little bit more difficult.
Well, yeah, but I think an important distinction to make is people thrive in different environments, right? Like some environment or some team you might not fit very well on, and you might be perceived as difficult to work with, or something like that. And then you go to a different team where the dynamic is different, or maybe you're doing something that you like more or something like that, and you're happier as a result. And you're more personable because of it, right? So I think that shifting dynamics in teams and people's lives even, right? Like I think when people think of like, oh, productions and working with people, it's like, you zoom in on like the production and their contribution and stuff, but there's so much outside of that can have an impact on people's, I don't know, performance and people's like attitude and stuff. So
yeah, and also I guess like there's some team. I guess it's a cumulative effect where I was watching Last Dance with Michael Jordan on Netflix. And Dougie Howlett, one of his early coaches, said like the way to show respect to a great player is to coach him hard and like not give him an easy go. And I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, I guess it could be cool like that when you have like a really good art director who really pushes you to like, you're a good artist, you're a great artist, but we need to push you. Yeah.
Isn't that what the movie Whiplash is about? I haven't seen it.
Whiplash. Oh, I love Whiplash. Whiplash is that taking a bit more to the extreme. Like finding prodigies.
But then, that premise to a movie level of drama.
Yeah, and it's also like I don't know. it's the kind of thing like have you seen this Pain and Gain with Mark Wahlberg and Dwayne Johnson? It's a really funny.
No.
It's a bit of a weird film. It's based on a true story. This guy like got kidnapped, but basically Mark Wahlberg's this like juiced up like moron basically, and he says a line. He's like, "Yeah, I look up to all these inspirational people out there. Like Scarface, he's self-made. Rocky, he's self-made." And I'm like, they're fictional characters, and that's the point. That's part of the joke. I kind of feel like that with Whiplash. I was like, it's one of my favorite movies, but it's fictional. Whereas like Netflix, The Last Dance, and Michael Jordan, that's a real guy, which is insane to see figure up in the first place. But yeah, so like it's with that kind of mind. I mean, even them sorts of mindsets, having someone who's like, "Oh, we're going to push you to be the best of the best." Even that, I imagine like for the first 6 months, people would love that. But then like, okay, 2 years in of a production, okay, this is getting real fucking old now. But
Yeah,
I've been thinking
but
about that.
depends on the person too, right? Like some people want to always be challenged on every single thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just are like, all right, do we need to challenge the scratches on my little pen asset that I'm making, or can we just call it done? And so I don't know. It's variable. Yeah.
It's interesting, right, as well, because not everyone wants that, but you need like both ends of the spectrum. You need those people who are like, you know what, I can get the job done and we get going. I guess you want them people who want to push the boundaries of what can be done. I guess it's just very hard. I mean, I know that's what I struggled with in the past in teams, is like knowing I'm one of the ones who like to be pushed, but not everybody wants to be pushed. And it's like, okay, you to figure out like where then people are. And there's those soft skills which are really hard to develop because it kind of feels like you only develop them by doing it wrong and realizing, oh shit, I made a mistake and I need to learn from that.
Failing is important. Never underestimate the value of failing.
Yeah.
I was at a place before and one of the guys, creative director or something, was like, fail early, fail often. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's important. And I remember like I was talking to my lead about something and he was like, invalidating something is just as important as, you know, validating and figuring it out, right? Like if you start and you're like, I don't know which way to go, and you're like, okay, well, I could try, you know, northeast, southwest, and you say, well, north doesn't work, west doesn't work. You've narrowed down all your options, you know, by 50%. So I feel like a lot of people have pressure to just like get it right the first time. And like, I don't really think that's what game dev is. I think game dev is iteration and, you know, just figuring out like how many times can we iterate on this before we just have to basically ship it and call it done.
I guess it doesn't help either the landscape of the games industry and the art industry in general, because it's like you always see people's highlight reels. But the bit that gets me, I mean, this is one of the things I really pushed when I was at ArtStation. Tutorials, show your mistakes, show your workings. Like I know I beat myself up a lot when I was watching tutorials, especially when I was learning a substance designer, and the person just breezes through, like, and I'm sitting here like pushing nodes, going, he can do it, I'm not doing it right. I think I told you this story with Ben Wilson, where like he had 20 minutes.
Ben tutorial, yeah.
Oh, so good, like 20 minutes, and he goes, this is wrong, goes back to the beginning. And that was the one which clicked in my head, and I was like, oh, this is alright. But that wanting to fail is hard because you think you fuck it up.
Yeah, it's more important to understand like the mindset and like we were talking about soft skills, right? Like with tutorials, I think there's so much stuff where it's just like, okay, place this node, and it's just like very you know, by the numbers. I think it's more important to say like, this is the mindset that I have when I'm looking at this. This is how I see something, break it down into these little chunks, and then from there like execute on it, right? And like that's what I care about. Like I mean I want to know what Ben Wilson's thinking when he's making stuff, not just like the sequence of nodes that he uses.
It's hard to get to that stage as well of like being so comfortable where you just like you throw, like if someone's like, I want to make a tree bark, okay, there is like a series of nodes I could do, but being comfortable and just throwing random stuff down and just like knowing the landscape to experiment, because it's experimenting and like just going nowhere because you're throwing just ridiculous nodes together which shouldn't belong together. But kind of knowing your software well enough to be able to experiment and try new things and go into like uncharted waters. that takes a certain level of like, I think that's why it's so difficult for people, because it takes that base level of knowledge. And that's, I mean, them sort of like step by step by the numbers are good to a point, but I don't think you can really say you're comfortable in the software until you can kind of treat it as a playground and like just try things. You don't have to follow a recipe. I guess the same with chefs, right? If you got like Gordon Ramsay doesn't get a cookbook out and have to follow a recipe to make like a meal. He knows how to experiment and try things.
Yeah, there's on the topic of cookbooks, I haven't had breakfast yet. There's like a cookbook that I got. It's like the only one I bought. It's called the Food Lab, and it's very specifically that. It's the science of cooking, and it's like when you know, what's the Maillard reaction? It's like when you get to, I think, 450 degrees Fahrenheit, the sugars in your food start to caramelize, and it makes your food taste good. And like, and that's way more important to, I think, to learn than just like, okay, here's the ingredients that you put together in sequence, right? Because that lets you improvise and it lets you think on your feet, and you gain a deeper knowledge of like, why does your food or your art taste or look good?
Yeah, I guess it's similar to like, I guess, understanding what, like, I guess a blend layer in Photoshop, right? Like knowing what an overlay does is more important than necessarily finding the right image to overlay on top of something, because like, oh, it just worked. Well, okay, you need to replicate that on something else. Well, I don't know why it worked. It just worked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's a pretty cool cookbook, actually. That sounds pretty interesting. That like it breaks it down almost academically, I guess.
Yeah. I think it won one of the big like James Beard cooking awards or something like that, which I think is pretty prestigious in the cookbook world.
I mean, I'm not just. Actually, I know a lot of people who listen to this who are foodies, so I think they might appreciate that. Food Lab.
Yeah, it's by, here, let me look it up quick. Kenji, I think his name is. The food. Yeah, Kenji Lopez Alt. J. Kenji Lopez Alt. Sorry, it's called the Food Lab. I've said it like 50 times, so if somebody hasn't
locked on yet,
jotted it down yet, yeah, they'll probably not care. So anyway, art, not food.
Well, overlays, actually, you know what? I want you to. You did a really good Twitter thread about someone who was having the issue of like repeating patterns from a tiling texture on a big surface. Now, not to put you on the spot, it'd be really cool for you to just kind of like reiterate that, because I don't think everyone saw that Twitter thread. And it was a really good thread because, for context, like, there's a big learning curve for, like, say, environment artists where you know that I can't just one-to-one texture every prop I want to make. You have to learn to use a pipeline and use tricks. And this is the one which I think is the material art equivalent. So could you break down the I'm not going to like spoil it, but like break down that thread a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think like we've all learned like trim sheets and things like that, which is like great for making large assets like the hard surface and stuff like that. But it can be tricky with like large organic things when you're trying to make something look good up close and make sure that it's like holds up to your game's textile density. But also when you go far away, that it doesn't just make it super obvious that there's like a repeating tiling texture. You can vert blend things, but what I wanted to touch on with that was basically like, even if you vert blend and you have a bunch of layers, like that can only take you so far depending on like how big or flat or whatever your asset is, right? Because the big reason is because of frequency. Because if you have like four, or I don't know, like if you have four layers of tiling textures and you're blending them all together, chances are they're probably going to be about the same tiling rate, like so that the textile density matches, right? So any pattern that's in all those tiling textures will repeat at the same frequency across your asset. So it doesn't matter regardless, because you'll always see like that one splotch, in the same sort of like grid-like pattern, and the human eye is really good at perceiving any patterns, right? So what you need to do on top of that is have lower frequency breakup that modulates your tiling textures. So, and by lower frequency, like you think of like white noise is high frequency, where it repeats a lot, it's really grainy. Medium frequency is like Clouds 2 in Designer or something like that. And low frequency is like your Perlin noise, where the zoom is like really low and it's just like, kind of warbly, right? So we took, like you said, in sculpts, it's like talking about managing forms and balancing like your primary shapes, your secondary shapes, and your tertiary shapes and things. And the same principle applies to textures, and I think they go hand in hand,
Mm-hmm.
especially once you start doing more advanced like workflows with like your shader setup and things, right? Because in your sculpts, you probably, if your asset's huge, you probably don't want to include a lot of like high frequency detail because it's going to be too low res in your sculpt.
Mm-hmm.
So you push that to your tiling textures, right? But I guess what I'm saying is having lower frequency, like macro texture breakup can do a really good job of like breaking up all of that obvious repetition. And
Mm-hmm.
on that Twitter thread, I had like just a 3x3 tiling texture with like a grunge concrete thing I found on like Google quickly just overlaid.
Mm-hmm.
And because the overlay is modulating the tiling textures, it's not replacing it, because if you replaced it, then you just have a really low res, like splotchy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so because it's modulating and adjusting the values, you keep the resolution up close, and then it just breaks up that grid like repetition, essentially.
It's quite an important step because it's one of those things as well, which you can't really you can't replicate in your kind of art software. Like you can't really see it in design now. It's hard to see in designer at least. You kind of need to be in the engine, and it's not a one-to-one material, right? It's like it's a one-to-one material, and then you're blending other supplementary textures on top of it in order to make your final result. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up on, or like they kind of miss that step. That you kind of need to do this in the engine, not in your art software, whatever it might be, ZBrush, designer.
Yeah, and that's why I like shaders so much, is because just as an environment artist, I was like, okay, cool, you can make rocks and stuff, but how do you like push it? How do you take it further, right? And you know, like on Godfall, I was like, okay, let's make some shaders. We get the macro stuff. Like, let's add some interesting, like, okay, we could do a moss layer, but how do we take that to the next level, right? Like, how do we make the moss feel more fuzzy with like the time we have or whatever? And you know, you can do shader tricks and things like that in order to elevate your art.
You're right there.
Yeah, it's like pollen and stuff. It's always worse in the morning for me. Yeah.
Well, I mean that kind of stuff. It's how to explain it. It allows you to make it a mundane thing look interesting, right? Like I think it's very hard to just take anything and do it one to one, and for it to be in an environment super interesting, especially stuff like moss. Moss is such a. I mean, I'm looking into it at the moment for like a project I'm working on, and I'm like, oh god, like working out a different species of moss and like when they interact with it. I went down such a rabbit hole. I was like, oh god. I thought it was just gonna be, just make a nice fuzzy moss and it sits on top, and it's like, oh no. Once it reaches a certain density, then it turns into like this strangly thing, which like has to go out and find new crevices to build into. And I was like, oh okay, there's a whole life cycle to stuff, but you can't do all of that in the texture or like in an asset one to one. Like you need all this clever stuff to come together to make it. It's very interesting watching you work on, because I know you helped me a bit with shaders on Godfall, and it was like seeing you explain stuff helped understand like how simply or narrow-mindedly I was looking at my art, because it's like, oh yeah, we got the you I'm not going to get into it too much, but it's like, oh yeah, doing like material functions. Oh, if you do this and this, you get this result, and it's way cheaper. And I'm like, oh okay, that saved me like 6 days.
Yeah, it's Aladdin style. It's a whole new world once you, learn about some shaders and stuff like that, and even just basic stuff to kind of do some of your bread and butter, macro rock blending stuff. Like it's a gateway. So yeah, I think it's important. Like, everyone talks about art, and I think it's important to understand like the science behind things, like you're talking about your moss and things like that, in order to get a deeper appreciation and understanding, and push your art to the next level, right? Like, so for example, we're talking about tiling textures, and I've got this book, and it talks about like the biology of seeing and the biology of art, and it's cool because I learned that the human eye actually it processes color and value, black and white, independently by like a split second. And the brain actually reads value first,
Mhm.
and then it picks up on color. So, like how that relates to tiling textures is if you notice your repetition a lot. I used to spin my wheels like, why does this repeat so much? Like what? And I just like noodle and shift things around and push and pull pixels and things. But this helped me where I have a more like scientific approach. If I see that a texture's tiling a bunch, I look in just black and white first, and you show me that
Yeah.
cool hotkey. Like on, I just have this hotkey now to make my entire PC just black and white, so I can
Yeah.
see everything like grayscale.
By the way, just for context, I didn't come up with that. Kieran Goodson showed me that, and then I've like
Oh,
spread it to
okay.
everyone I work with. But yeah,
Okay, cool. But it's super handy, and I use it all the time because yeah, if you see a tiling texture and it repeats, I look first and say, okay, in black and white, is it tiling a lot?
hmm
And so I'll fix my values first, and then I'll look and I'll see like, okay, that's better, but it's still, not quite as uh, nice as I'd like it to be, right? And then from there, I can take a look at just the hues and adjust the hues and the separation in those, right? Um, and I showed like the same thing. I had an example in that thread for like if you had like some crazy splotchy value or something in your tiling texture and it's like too bright, doesn't matter how much of the low frequency macro layering you do, you're still going to end up with like obvious repetition because you're not managing the frequencies within your tiling texture itself, because we're talking about like low, medium, and high frequency on an asset level. But I also think that in your tiling texture for each sort of specific thing, you need to think about how those frequencies uh, affect your prop or your asset that you're making, right?
yeah. I mean, it's weird when you get into the science of things. It's amazing how much you're not aware. I mean, so for example, I was when I was getting into composition,
Mhm.
I came across this theory like the composition of color, and how like not
Yeah.
all colors are equal. You get heavy colors and you got light colors, and like for example,
Mhm.
like if you take red and yellow, drag them to the top right of their value on a hue chart, and turn on black and white. The red is darker than the yellow, even though they sit in the same value on the hue slider.
Yeah.
Red is darker, and
Saturation.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm like, oh, okay. So like, even though they're the same saturation, like they just the colors alone. 'Cause I thought mathematically, like if they're on the right hand side of that scale, when I turn it black and white, they'll always go across to be the same. And I was like, oh, and now you link that to composition. It's like, okay, composition, like, oh, it feels a bit wrong, but I've got the angles, I've got the lines, and it's to do with their
Yeah.
colors. And I was like, oh, okay, now I know that. Is this level of understanding where it's like it's easier to craft a composition. And it's weird. Like I think that's why actually I think I've gone with you in terms of like getting art feedback from you both on personal and work. Is that when you understand this stuff, you like understand why you're giving critique, you understand why things look wrong, and you understand how to fix it. You look at this thing
Yeah.
and go, oh, like this whole frequency thing. Oh, it's a little bit high frequency. Here's some ways to fix that, rather than
Yeah.
looks wrong. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean looks
But
wrong?
why? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important. And I think that there's obviously really talented artists who can just like intuitively do it. And I am not one of those people.
No.
I yeah, so I think like it's important to, you know, kind of learn outside of just like purely art to support those things. At least for me. Everyone learns differently, right? So depends.
Do you think it's probably the same? Is it the same thing we're talking about when we say people need to level up their like artistic eye? Like it's basically the same thing, right? It's being able to look at something and know not only what looks good or bad, but know why it looks good or bad. Because I've always said that with like when I've gone to photography, it's like, oh, I want to level up my artistic understanding of an eye.
Yeah.
Actually, what I'm understanding is why things look good or bad, and that's like translating into the photography, which translates into my art. Is it more? Is that what we're talking about here? Basically, your artistic eye getting better, even though it's knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, art improving your artistic eye, I think, is the same thing as just like um, improving your like well of knowledge, right? And so, yeah, I think it's the same thing. And I think how you do that is just through repetition and failure. Like they're saying,
Yeah.
how many photos? Well, I don't know. How many photos do you take that are like bad versus the ones you think are good?
Probably, if I go on a
Like
shoot,
what's
I'll probably
the
get 10 good
ratio?
photos out of like 200, probably.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not very good.
Um, so
Takes a
I think
lot.
that's like, is that like, oh, it's math. Is that 5%? I think so.
That's, yeah, it's 5%.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
That's quick.
And so 5%. Well, I'm an artist. I don't know, but 5% of your photos, right? So that's like every like 100 you take, like only five are good, right?
Mm.
And do you take a look at the other like 95% and say like, oh, I don't like this because I know when I do stuff, I am I take photos, but I'm shy, so I don't post anything really. But I know when I look at them, I'm like, oh, this is bad because, and this is, I like this, but it's not quite right. Like the composition is good, but the like colors are wrong, and you know what I mean, like that sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
A lot. So it's like it's split between two categories. There's like the first category where like I have a location. I'll take like 5 or 6 of different angles and heights and
Yeah,
values. Like I have higher ISO or lower ISO. But when I look at
yeah,
like say 20, which are the same thing but it's from slightly different angles, it's
yeah,
like okay, which one works the best? It's more I not so much look at why they're bad, but I work out why that one works over the others.
yeah,
Um, there are quite a lot of one-offs I take, and I look at it and I'll go, yeah, I don't like this, because I still try and fix a lot of them. Like I'll get into Lightroom and be like, oh, maybe I just need to tweak the like angle or like the
yeah,
crop in or the values, and it's like, okay, this isn't working. By that point, I probably already understood. Most of the time, if you've actually took it into edit and tried to fix it, you've already figured out why it isn't working. So a big mistake I tend to make is I get really bad like height on my photos. Like I'll either try doing eye level and it looks just generic, or I go way too low and I've got too much ground and like it doesn't flow nicely into the subject.
yeah.
But you tend to get I tend to figure that out just by trying to fix it in post. I don't
Is
objectively
that
look
the
at the
high
photo.
thing?
Yeah, well, even
Yeah,
high thing I can sometimes fix if I like crop it right in. I've fixed a
yeah,
couple of photos like that, but it's like I don't objectively
yeah.
look at the photo and go, "Oh, it's bad because of this." It's after trying to edit it, I figure it out.
Oh, okay. Yeah, interesting.
It's time consuming. It's one of the reasons like I'll have to like if I do a shoot, I have to leave it a week and just come back. That's what I have started doing actually, is not editing photos on the same day. Like, because in my
Yeah,
head, I
yeah,
already know like early on, I know like 3 shots I really really liked, and I'll go in and
yeah,
I want to edit them and I put all my effort into them and I kind of ignore the rest. If I leave it
yeah,
a week, I've forgotten pretty much about everything I've taken, and I just look through the photos with fresh eyes and just pick out the good ones rather than the ones I know I wanted, which is
yeah.
helped quite a
Exactly.
lot.
Yeah, I think there's value in like, taking a step back, and I I respect the hell out of people who can just be like, okay, here's art, I'm posting it, here's art, I'm posting it, here's art, I'm posting it. Um, but I cannot do that. What I do is I will sometimes even go as far as make a mock post on ArtStation. Don't publish it, but I'll just like save it and preview it, and then I'll leave it for a little while, and then come back later and be like, I don't like this.
It's I've actually had people say this to me about that, like, 'cause I tend not to get very attached to my art, like I'm very distant
Yeah,
from it. But even me, like there was I like to try and push stuff just far enough to like be worthy of at least showing somebody. And it's a piece of advice I
yeah,
got from a friend. I've been trying to get into, I've been getting into like more and more ZBrush, and for
yeah,
like 2 weeks, I was like showing him my art, and he's like an incredible artist, and he was kind of like, you keep going too far with my scoops. Like the hard bit with is like scooping like a rock is getting the big forms right. And every
yeah,
time I'd go past the big forms and start doing the interesting little bits to make it look sexy, like the layering and all that kind of stuff. He's like, you're already attached to it at that point. Like you're already gone too far. He's like, whatever you
mhm,
do, like work on it for an evening, get the macro forms, and then delete it. Don't save it. Because I'd work on it for
yeah,
like 3-4 days and then show him something. He's like, why are you still on this? Like you're not going to use it. So
yeah,
having like, I think he did it for about 2 weeks of sculpting and not saving a single one of them scoops. And that was super hard for me because I like to keep a lot of resources handy. But
yeah,
it did help. It was like, oh, okay, like I put, because you put repetitions in then, I'm just trying to figure out macro forms, figure out forms, figure out forms. And you don't waste time chipping edges or adding a layer in.
yeah,
It's helped quite a lot with the whole like not being too attached to my art. It's quite a
yeah. And
handy thing.
you shouldn't be.
Yes,
I
that's the thing,
think
yeah.
I think that you're grown up, man. You're little baby Alex is big Alex.
Man, all them grades are finally to catch up with me. Like I now have the head of hair I have. It is hard though. Like I mean, I think every artist probably struggles with this a little bit. You know, like even when we're in production, like you want your art to look as good as possible. And then it's like, you know, when you press play and you play the game, and you're like, suddenly you're no longer looking at your art, you're looking at a game, and it's like, I gotta remember this is what we're making, not the pretty portfolio place.
We're not making Rock Asset the review game. We're making, this epic story, right? And I think you have to think of like what you're doing again in the mindset of a production artist. Like, what are you doing, and how does it serve the project that you're on, right? Like, the bigger, the macro picture. What's the macro sculpt of this game versus like you're just small single asset.
It's I guess it's not really any way to really get back. I'm trying to think if there's any way if you done anything to help get around that. I don't think there is. Like, I guess there's reps of experience. It's one of the things. I don't like saying it because I don't like anything being down to just time and experience, because it's like an additive issue at that point. It's very hard to do anything about as a younger artist. I guess there isn't really anything you could do about it. Like, you just put it in a time to go through the process.
I would say just don't panic, right? Like, especially when I was younger in my like art career, I would panic a lot about this isn't working, like I'm wasting time and like all that sort of stuff. And it's okay. It doesn't matter. And you'll get better. So I know that's not very good advice if you're like a young artist and you're just anxious about, making the best looking stuff. But I think like art is a lifelong journey, right? And you can't rush it, and it's just gonna come with time.
It's one of I like to normally think of like ways where people can help themselves. But it's like, whenever it's just an additive issue, it's like, when both of us do mentoring, and it's like when it all comes on, it's like, okay, I want to learn environment art, and I'm like, okay, cool. Okay, so like I've got designer, I want to do like a week on designer, a week on painter, a week on modeling, and a week on, and I'm like, you need to spend like 6 weeks on one of them. Like, sorry, you can't rush this.
I remember when I was in school and my teacher was like, he was like, all right, so then you're like sculpting, and here's like a tree trunk you want to sculpt or something, and he's like, so do this and then do this. And it's like, I'd probably spend another like 16 hours on this or something. And I was like, what? He's like, look, you're gonna probably have to redo it a couple times, and you're gonna have to, like throw it away, and it's never going to be good enough the first time, right? Especially when you're like at that young of a stage. And so I think people just think like, oh well, I'll just crunch or whatever, and I'll get it done faster, and I'll level up faster, and that helps to a certain extent. But like I was saying, it's a lifelong thing, and you can't just race to the end of your art, like your life's art career. Like it's impossible, right? And so I think that's a source of a lot of stress for like younger artists, because it is like a love industry, and there's people all the time working away. And I've fallen into this trap on Twitter. It's easy to see all these people making incredible stuff all the time, and it's just like, I'm not outputting anything. But like you said, people highlight reels versus their I don't know, dead day, and it basically becomes a supercut of like sweet art that makes you feel bad about yourself.
It's funny though, because there's some artists I know who are like I guess you'll call them like social media artists, who produce a lot of art, not for like a personal project or anything. They just output art at high quantity. I've spoken to them in the past, and it's like, oh no, I have like 3 months of stuff in a backlog of like to post. So they're like, oh yeah, every week they're churning out stuff, and you're like, holy shit, this guy's going a million miles an hour. That's like a year's worth of work he's just got a highlight reel ready for. I've seen that a couple of times, and that was like a big wake up call to go, oh shit, like that's serious stuff. Or you don't notice when they've gone quiet, and then they've been quiet for like 6 months, and then you only notice that they start posting again, and it's like, oh, like they're posting art every week. Yeah, but they were quiet for nearly a year. Like, what do you think they were doing during that time?
But you don't think about it, because your feed is still just got all these other people. Like, if you're following like 500 artists or whatever, and then one or two go quiet for a year, you don't really notice because you're like rocks, textures, environments, lumen, lighting,
I
and
think
it feeds that like ADD social media brain.
you say that. Actually, you know what I think helps probably the most of it is being engaged with your, I guess, or like feel like you're doing good work in the day job. Every time you're happy at work, I know it's the same for me anyway. Like anytime I'm not happy or I work, like having a bad day, or like I'm on a particularly difficult bit or whatever it might be, you notice that stuff more because you're not seeing you make any progress in your day stuff. There's no positive feedback. Whereas you get online and you go, oh, I've had a shit day at work and or like a shit week or a shit month or I'm on a bad milestone. And that person's doing their job and they're putting great portfolio work out. It's like, oh, fuck me, man, what am I doing? But when you're happy at work, I tend not to notice that stuff at all. I don't get down about it. I'm like, no, but I know that I've done this really cool thing at work. It doesn't matter what they're doing. And that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, I think that, like you've said, like personal versus professional art as like a way to, not stress or whatever. But I think zooming out even further, just other life stuff, right? Like, and that's the work-life balance that's so important, right? Like, again, if you're doing this art stuff for the rest of your life, you can't sprint forever, you know? And so taking a step back and balancing out with other things that supplement, like photography. I like to draw and I like to cook and stuff like that. And it's like,
dude, I've just picked up. I've started skateboarding.
there you go.
This week, I've never set foot on a skateboard, and I bought one this weekend, and I've just started skateboarding this week just for something to like get me out of the house, like do something, learn something. I like learning. Even when I was playing rugby, I didn't like being competent. Not really feel like I was developing, but like this week's been great. Every day, I'm like, oh, okay, I can ride a skateboard now. I can turn. I can ollie.
Well,
it's like great.
Like learning. And I like, the movie Soul came out and I was late to the party because my dogs, every time they saw a cat, freaked out. So I was like, oh man, I was late to watch it. But I really liked that movie because it did just kind of say, at least my interpretation of it was like, that's the point of life, is to just kind of like futz around and learn stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like learning is just as important as like continuing to improve something that you already know, whether it be like related to your field or not, right? Because I think learning how to learn and learning that critical thinking and problem solving skills can help you advance your art, like regardless, I guess,
It's probably one of them things. It's almost like it's so hard for people to park their ego. I mean, I know with me with skating, growing up as a rollerblader, so I was very, very good at rollerblading. But I've never skateboarded. And being stepping on a skateboard and looking like a moron who could barely push along, it's like, I don't care. I'm like, yeah, fine, it's okay. I don't mind being a moron. Like,
it's humbling. It's
exactly. And I think being comfortable with being the moron in a room is very beneficial to your art, because it's like, oh god, I don't know how to do Houdini, and there's these people doing amazing Houdini shit. It's fine. I'll put some time in and I'll learn and I'll catch up eventually. But like, I think that's one of the biggest. I know, especially early on for me, it was really hard for me to learn new software because I hated not knowing how to do stuff. And that was like early 20s. I barely developed as an artist because I was just so pissed off every time I tried to do something new. Oh, I'm shit at this. I don't want to do it. Whereas more recently, it's easy.
You're putting yourself in the pressure cooker right away. You're just like, all right, cool. In 8 hours, I got to have the best, I don't know, crock pot stew or whatever. And that's not how it goes. It's not healthy to think like that.
You know what? Game production actually does help with that, I feel like. When you do personal art, it's easy to treat like that. Like I said, it's got to be done in a day. When you're in production work, it always feels like it's okay that it's a work in progress and it takes X amount of time to do whatever task, because there's lots of factors coming from all different directions that take you from like your first iteration and what you would call done as well. And then like, say for example, when I was working with you and we were doing the fire round, and I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna make this. Okay, yeah, cool first draft. Now let's do like these other things. And it's like, okay, like you see that progression. It's just hard for people to want to get past that. My first draft wasn't a full thing.
And like you said, you learn that from production. And being on productions is merely just a matter of time, right? Like,
yes,
it's just something that you get with experience, and that's why, like you said, you hate to say additive, is the solution, but it's true. Because it gives you more perspective, right? Like my first like big production, I was like stressed, and it was like, this is gonna, my stuff doesn't look good and whatever. And it's like, well, you figure out different things of, different lighting tech or whatever that, sort of unlock, and it lets you, like, gives you more options, right? And so it's just iterative, and like getting to that 80%, like, I don't know if we talked about this before, but like, I think it's pretty common sentiment in the games industry. Like going from 0 to 80 takes like X amount of time, and it takes just as much time to get from like 80 to 100.
Yeah.
And so what's important is just getting to 80 as fast as possible, so that you can iterate and get more iterations, right? Like if you spent like, 15 days on every single asset, and you make a lot less assets in the game. But if you spend like 5 days, you make triple the amount, let's just say on average. But then that also means that you could be maybe what you think is done sooner, which then lets you say, okay, now let's actually finish this, right? And especially on longer sprint productions and things, like the art rot is real.
Yeah.
Something you made at the beginning of the production probably isn't going to hold up, or it's likely it won't. Whether it be because tech has changed, or your art standards have been raised, or the direction is different, or something like that, right? Like that happens, and that's perfectly natural. And like you said, throw away all your sculpts, and your scene or your project is probably going to be better for it.
Well, I guess if you do that as well, you get to like that 80% quickly. When you look back, because if you try to do everything at 100%, probably doesn't get done. Whereas if you're like, okay, here's like the golden path, the main route for the game. All right, do we need to spend the extra 6 days is to take this pebble over here to 100%, or does the textures make the main path, you take it to 100%? It's like, once you go to 80, it's like I can prioritize where my attention is needed, and then the other stuff is like nice to have if I can get to that stuff, or if it's even needed, or if you even notice it. Same with personal projects too.
Yeah, it might get cut, or it might just be in shadow, and it doesn't matter anyway and stuff. So there's a lot more to it than just your asset. And I think that goes back to what you're saying. It's just like put aside your ego.
Yeah, it's difficult to do. I mean, it's funny because I was thinking about this with I was talking to Kevin about this regarding like competitiveness. There's like certain things we have which automatically get tagged as like bad, like negative. And like ego and like competitiveness is one of them. I think there is positive aspects to them. Ego is good because it does push you to be better and like make you want to be better and be the best or whatever it might be. Just as a step to you've gone too far. And having like, I guess, having control of your ego rather than your ego have control of you. It's just an interesting idea. Like I said, I think both of us are the same. Like I think we know we're okay with being novices and learning stuff. That's fine. I think a lot of people being scared to learn stuff, like it is just all ego. Especially if you come from a student background, if you spent your whole like past 3 years being the best student, and then now you're no longer the best, you're back to being bottom of the pecking order, beginning of your career, it's like you're no longer the best. You have to be okay with that. And those who struggle tend to be the ones who are still in that mindset. I was the best in the class. I should still be the best now, and it's still all in their ego.
Yeah. Was it Bruce Lee, maybe, who said like hard work beats talent every single time?
Oh, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
Yeah,
I don't know who said it. Don't know who said it, but I have heard that one before. Yeah, it's very true. Well, I'm a testament to this. Like even with like sport and art, like I am the least athletic person you'll ever meet. I was the worst. Like in my team growing up, I was the worst player.
Apparently, it's been quoted to Tim Notka, a high school basketball coach. Just want to give credit. But you were the worst player.
I was like the worst player. Yeah, and it's just like, but I've always been the hardest worker. And it's just like, same with like art. Like I'm not particularly talented at art. I don't have a good eye for this stuff. I just put a lot of hours in. I put a lot of reps in. And I think there's a lot of talented people who, and again, even I hate that word as well. I hate the word talent. Kind of demeans the idea of people, because people, the ability to produce art still comes from putting reps in and stuff. So even the word talent, I hate.
Like it might be a modifier or a boost at the beginning of your career, but I think beyond that, like you couldn't be like, I'm talented at 3D, and then in 2 years be like, I'm a lead or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because I imagine there's a lot of people who also like, if you're a younger artist, you kind of perspective changes your mind a lot. I mean, I know early on I was like this. Like I thought my ability was in a certain place, and I thought I was able to do a certain thing. You get put into a certain situation, you're like, oh, okay. Turns out I can't do this, and you can't learn that without being put into that situation. I think it's probably hard for a lot of people listening who's like younger artists hearing this and like, oh, I am humble and I am this and I am that. It's like, yeah, but until you're put in a situation where you're kind of shown the mirror that you're maybe not as whatever it might be as you might think, I think it's quite hard for people to kind of see it, I guess. You hear it, but it's like it's hard for it to connect the dots in your own life or rationalize it in your own life.
Yeah. I agree. Well,
dude, that's a very heavy philosophical note to end on. But mate, we've been going for nearly an hour, and it's always fun chatting to you. I mean, I know me and you what's the word? We could talk shit for a long time, very easily, and I imagine I'm gonna probably have you back on again to talk again. But I appreciate you coming back on, man. It's been really fun chatting.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for setting it up and everything. It's always fun waxing philosophical with you. So, like you said, we've got some good debates.
Yes.
And it's a good time always. So thanks.
And remember, everyone listening, do the usual like, follow, share, subscribe. The more that people share it, the more people get to listen to the fantastic information Kurt has to share. But we're going to sign off. I'll catch everyone next week. Peace out, guys.